Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Holland. I'm a businessman. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a CPA that's worked in the corporate world, and I've worked in the investment and financial services industry. I've also started multiple companies that have achieved millions of dollars in sales, and I've sold companies with multi-million-dollar valuations. You can find more about my background at our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. Follow me on Twitter, Holland Podcast, to join in the conversation about business that we have outside of the podcast every week. Lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, to get updates every week when we post the video version of the podcast on Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us each and every week to talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. This week, I have a friend and an excellent entrepreneur joining us, Mark McWilliams, and he is the owner of a very high-end luxury winery in Healdsburg, California. I've had the pleasure of going to the winery and enjoying his wine, and it is fantastic. But even more incredible, or as incredible, I should say, is his journey on how he and his family have made Arista Winery one of the premier luxury wineries in Napa Valley. Mark, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast.
Andrew, it's a pleasure to be on.
So you and I have gotten to talk about Arista Winery that you are the owner of, along with your brother, Ben. But before we get into that detail, and you're, of course, a wine connoisseur and have given me many great tastes of wine, and I've learned a lot from you. Take us back. Take us back to how you became an entrepreneur, where you developed the entrepreneurial spirit. From my understanding, your parents started Arista Winery, so you grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Take us back. Where did you grow up? Where did that entrepreneurial drive and spirit come from? And bring us through today on how you got there.
Yeah, sure. So, I guess, to kind of start it off, I don't know if I've ever really looked at myself as a pure entrepreneurial guy. I mean, that's just not how I view myself. Though clearly, it's what my brother and I, my family, have done. It really was just a pursuit of a passion. So I grew up not in the hotbed of grape growing and winemaking in the U.S. I grew up in a small town in East Texas, a little town called Texarkana, right on the border of Texas and Arkansas. So went to high school there, went to college at the University of Texas. But when I was in junior high-ish, my parents, who had vacationed a lot into Napa and Sonoma, when I was in junior high, they had the opportunity to purchase a piece of land in Sonoma County in the Alexander Valley, really with a loose dream, a loose vision of what they were going to do with that. There was a piece of land that could be developed to have some vineyards. My parents loved that idea. They were thinking at that point kind of in a 20-year timetable, where my father thought from that point, this was in probably 92, 93,
Okay.
that about 20 years later, my father would be ready to retire. And so that was going to kind of be a retirement chapter of their life. They would plant a vineyard, it would establish and get going. And I think that when they did that, they weren't really doing that initially with kids and a family business in mind. It really was kind of for them, for retirement.
Yeah.
So after college, I studied communications at the University of Texas in Austin. Kind of didn't know exactly what I wanted to do coming out of school. And so talked to my parents about maybe going out to California post graduation and working a harvest. Didn't even know what that meant. Just to see, it sounded cool. It certainly sounded pretty exotic growing up in Texarkana, Texas, to go work a grape harvest. But
Leaving
honestly,
Texas and working in Napa Valley and taking advantage of a harvest season in
I mean,
wine country.
and frankly, it was uh, delaying the real world at that point by at least another 6 months. So at 21, 22, that was kind of the objective. And honestly, I did not know what was about to happen to me. I got this job working. I was super underqualified for it, but I got a job working. It's called grower relations for a large winery, but it's part of their vineyard team is what that was. And I could tell you, I don't know, people maybe have these moments in their life. If I've ever had an epiphany, this was my epiphany. I know exactly when it was. It was Labor Day weekend of 2000, and I am walking a vineyard. I'm newly employed. I've been employed for about 2 weeks.
And this is what
Uh,
year?
this is in the year 2000. I
Okay.
moved
Oh,
to California
2000
in
you said.
August
Okay.
of 2000. And so first weekend of September 2000, I'm walking a vineyard with two winemakers who are now really dear friends of mine 20 some odd years later, but at the time didn't know me from Adam. I'm walking a vineyard with them, Labor Day weekend. It's a Chardonnay vineyard. I can remember I was wearing a white T-shirt, Wranglers, and Red Wing boots, and I'm walking a vineyard in Sebastopol, California. I vividly remember this, and
I mean, this must be a very, very meaningful memory if you've got that much
I
detail.
mean, yeah, I could tell. I could take you to the vineyard. I could tell you the direction we were walking in this vineyard row.
That's so
It
cool.
was kind of burned in my memory. But the bottom line is, I was listening to them talk, and they're eating these Chardonnay grapes, and they're making their decisions about when they're imminently ready to pick, just days away. And as they're tasting this fruit, I'm just having this moment. My mind is being blown, where I'm suddenly connecting all of the dots. That okay, yeah, wine comes from grapes. We're tasting grapes. Here's these flavors. We're about to pick this. I like this just was blowing my mind in the moment, and I just remember that day saying, "This is what I want to do for the rest of my life." I didn't even know what that meant, but this is what I was blown away by it. And so at that point, I first of all started paying attention to work, but went back, started taking some continuing education classes at the local junior college here. Joined some tasting groups. Just started picking the brains of the vineyard side and the winemaking side, and really honestly, in that day, found my passion, my calling in life, and off we went. So I don't want to belabor it too much, but that kind of was like the phase one. At that point, I think my parents sensed some passion, but understandably, at 21, they were proceeding cautiously with my
Yeah.
newfound passion. So
Wise
they weren't
parents.
that's right. They're smart. They knew me. Wasn't the first time I'd found a passion. Um, but after 4 years of working really for a larger company and learning the business is when we as a family begin talking about moving from grape growing to winemaking. And maybe this is part of the entrepreneurial question, but as we begin to look at our business, we had 40 acres of Cabernet Sauvignon in the Alexander Valley. And at that point, my parents were in a position where they didn't really need that income to sustain them in retirement, but it certainly was not going to be enough income to begin to support multiple families. I have other siblings, and were they going to be involved? So, as we looked at the business and we're beginning to kind of learn more about it, we felt that the winemaking side, was more scalable, or at least more cost effective to scale. You weren't having to buy acres and acres of land, which is incredibly expensive out here.
Yeah.
You were able to buy tons of grapes, which is how wine is purchased, and so it's just easier to do that way. So it was in 2002 that my parents launched Arista as a brand, and yeah, I guess that's what we're
So,
here to talk about.
so to recap, it's 1992. What did your parents are Al and Janice, correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
Al and
my
Janice
Al and
McWilliams.
Janice. My
And-
father was an orthodontist
Okay.
for 32 years. My father grew up kind of in classic Texas fashion, I guess. We had a family ranch that was multi generational. My father, like right now, my father is out literally building a fence. I mean, the man he works. He loves to do manual labor. He grew up that way, and that was for him. This vineyard was an opportunity to get to work outside in a cooler climate than
Yeah, because he's in Texas, is where the ranch is,
that's exactly right,
where it's
and it's
hot
just
and
hot.
humid during the summer
Yeah,
months.
you got, you know, cows and corn or cotton basically that you could grow where we were. So he was just really drawn to the beauty of California, the climate of California, and one thing I'll say about my father too, he was an orthodontist, and he tells the story, and I know he's sincere when he talks about it. My father is an artist. He's an incredible painter and drawer. He has an amazing eye for the aesthetic, and he talks about this epiphany that he had one day in California, realizing that there was a beauty to farming grapes that was different than other row crops. That there was an aesthetic to the way a vine is oriented and the rows line up, and people putting rose bushes at the end. There was a beauty to it that
Yeah.
was different, and it really kind of checked a lot of boxes for my dad, both farming, beauty, working with his hands. So I think
And
that's
so
kind of how we're going into it.
was 1992 the first time that your parents had gone to California, gone to Napa Valley?
No, they'd been kind of through the '80s.
Okay.
An uncle, my mom's brother, who actually was involved in the wine business and was kind of the conduit or the nexus that got them to California on vacations. And they just really, the more they spent, my mother had lived after college. For her, she lived in France for several years and was really exposed at a very young age, kind of an impressionable age, to food and wine and culture, and that was influenced on us growing up. I think my mother's an amazing cook, and we were always around smells and tastes and flavor in her kitchen. And I think she did an awesome job as a parent of never forcing stuff on us, but always encouraging us to try flavors and tastes and smells. Um, as they started having kids, it got more difficult for them to go to France, and they kind of rediscovered California to scratch that same kind of itch where they had vineyards and food and wine, and that really, they fell in love with California, and we never looked back.
I love your story for so many reasons because for you and your family, just like it is for many entrepreneurs, there's so many things in everybody's lives who are involved. You know, your mom going to France, and then your brother getting involved in wine country in California, and having your parents out there, and then you going to college and having at least been exposed to the idea of, or you were aware of, Napa Valley, and then you
Mhm.
go there and take a grower relations position. How all of those things, whether you knew it at the time or didn't, and more than likely you didn't, just like your mom was in France getting an appreciation for the wine culture and food, how it all culminates to what you guys ultimately ended up doing and had a strong passion for.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's why when I say I don't look at myself like I didn't decide I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just feel like some people, I guess you're fortunate enough, lucky enough to discover a passion, have a strong curiosity about a topic, whatever it is. In my case, it was grapes and wine, and really you begin to pursue that, and you don't know where it's exactly going to go, but there's a burning, driving passion to really do something more than just show up for a job. It really is an all-consuming thing, and for 23 years now, it's what's driven my family. It's
Yeah, and I think you were incredibly blessed in the sense that you said right out of college you took the grower relations. Now that's a push or a move you had to make,
yeah,
whether it was for to avoid life or not. You had this epiphany very early on,
right,
and that was your passion. For some of us, I've shared in the past that out of college was a CPA, worked for Ernst and Young, and eventually started a garbage company. Well, I can tell you that the waste services industry was not my passion
yeah,
by any stretch of the imagination. It took me a few years. Obviously, I'm very thankful for that because ultimately turned out being very successful. But some of us, it takes a little
yeah.
bit longer. And in your case, I think that's so incredible that you were able to find it so quickly.
Well, and I look at guys like you and other friends of mine who I really truly consider entrepreneurs, and I look at them, and I see like their gift and their passion really is this business sense and an ability to look at a business, understand it, break it down, improve it, grow it, whatever it is, and then move into maybe a completely unrelated business. But the gift and the passion that so many people there have is this ability to kind of understand the nuts and the bolts of a business. When I look at me, it's much more, and I mean, I definitely think we are strong entrepreneurs. We built a
Oh, yeah. I think you sell
business,
yourself short.
but I really think that for us, I had the blessing of finding a passion and was able to turn it into a very successful business. Um, but I don't necessarily, and because we have these conversations all the time, that like if I sold Arista, would I like immediately be ready to jump right back in and build another brand? Like this is such a passion project for me that like emotionally that would be it would I need some time out before I started.
Yeah, and I mean it's part of your identity at this
Yeah,
point.
right.
And having experienced the taste of the wine myself from Arista, some of the best I've ever had, I can understand how it would become part of your identity, and that's true for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yep,
So I want to. So 1992, your
yep.
parents buy this 40 acres. You said.
Yeah. Well, it was a much larger property, but there was 40 acres of vine that we planted.
Okay. Okay. And so you were just from 92 on, you were really just growing grapes.
That's right. It's a great way to kind of look at it. There's a few different chapters in this journey. So from 92 until say 2002, which is when Arista was started, we were growing grapes, selling grapes to other wineries. We were not making our own wine. We were really connecting in the industry, learning, meeting people, figuring the business out. And we early on, this is maybe something my father has taught us too, is very early on, was to surround ourselves with really smart people, because we didn't come 5 generations of grape growers or winemakers. So there was a lot of knowledge that we needed to acquire somehow quickly. And so working with vineyard management companies, as an example, that were experts in what they did to kind of bring us along. And so for me, it was really at a different phase of chapter in my life than my father. I saw this as a potential to be a future. My father was really kind of looking at this as a retirement kind of phase. So we really came at it. I think our appetite was the same, but we came at it from a very different perspective of what this meant. But yeah,
Yeah.
so for that 10-year period, we were just growing grapes and selling our fruit.
And had your parents moved the whole family to California, or who was managing, who was kind of boots on the ground in Napa Valley from
Great, great,
92 to 2002?
great question. So somebody had to pay for this upstart vineyard, and that was my father and his orthodontic practice. So, um, and I joke about that, but in our industry, the barrier to entry is high. I mean, if you think about the cost of an acre of land out here, if you think about the cost to develop an acre, it's crazy. And then to farm it for 3 to 5 years before you get a crop off of it, it really is on the front end really expensive to get into. And so my father continued practicing his orthodontics in Texas. I moved to California, began living on the family property. We had a home there. My uncle and my aunt were also living there. I told you they were involved in the wine business already, and
Yep.
he was a real mentor to me. But yeah, my father, to fast forward a little bit, retired in 2007. So for about 15 years there, I mean, they would spend large chunks of summer, Christmas, Thanksgiving, spring break, whatever it was. But no, that my father continued to practice until 2007.
So when did you move to California? To
In 2000.
In 2000. Okay, so from 92 to 2000, who was growing the grapes and managing the vineyard?
That was that vineyard management company that we
Okay.
had. So,
Okay.
yeah, they were the day to day, because at that point I was still high school, college.
Yeah.
It wasn't until post college that I moved there and really began working with them on our vineyard. Kind of, it was funny. I laugh now knowing what I know, but at the time, what do you know? I would get up and go to work in the Russian River Valley, which is where my day job was. But I would come home at night and walk these vineyards that were ours and practice or try to apply what I was doing in the Russian River Valley. So with Pinot Noir to Cabernet, which is, I mean, there's some concepts that are same. There's definitely, you handle them a little bit differently, but it
Yeah.
was an awesome time in my life, because this was a super remote, really remote vineyard that we lived on. And by that, I mean, it was about a 30-minute drive from the top of the mountain where we were to the bottom of the mountain. And then
Wow.
from there, it was another 20 minutes to get to Healdsburg, where I live now. So, which is not the greatest place to be as a single 21-year-old man.
I was gonna
Uh,
say.
but it did take a huge distraction away from me, and it really, I was just able to spend time, like in my lab. I was just in this vineyard, and I could spend hours walking and learning, and really kind of feeding a new passion.
Well, I love so many of the aspects of what you just described. So, your family didn't have 5 generations of winemaking history, grape growing history, winemaking
Right,
history. And so, when you don't have the knowledge or the experience, what do? You don't just fall down and say, well, how are we going to possibly do this? You seek out people who do have that.
right.
And then, on top of that, once you discovered this was your passion, you were wise enough to work for another company as a grower relations manager, correct? Or in
Yeah,
the grower relations department,
correct,
in the Russian River Valley.
correct.
Learn from that and then work on applying it to your business. I think that's such good advice for so many people who maybe feel less than capable
Yeah.
of entering into, as you described, and there's lots of industries like this, but even if they're not capital intensive, and winery industry, as you said, you got the land, and then the whole operations, and you've got the overhead and the structures. I mean, I've been there. It's incredible the amount of upfront capital costs that you have to invest before you can even sell one bottle of wine.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, but if anyone out there is feeling, I'm not capable of this, or I don't know how to do it, listen to what Mark just said. You and your family found people that did, built relationships with them, and then you found ways to get personal experience and apply that eventually to your own business.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to quickly kind of maybe put a bow on that is, we all are going to have strengths and weaknesses, advantages and disadvantages. And so, yes, there are a tremendous amount of advantages coming from 5 generations. I can also tell you there are some drawbacks from coming from 5 generations of this, and I think that I like many people, my college years were incredible, and what you learn in the classroom is important for kind of maybe more than anything just building some processes in your mind, structures and frameworks. But it was, I really looked at those first 3 or 4 years working for this larger company really as my college. I mean, that
Yeah.
became suddenly, it mattered, and I got it and I understood it. It wasn't just this kind of classroom stuff. And for me, my personality type, once I'm in on that, I am a sponge. I couldn't get enough of anything. Every aspect was fascinating to me. And for me, when I move into that spot, like I can go all day long. Like it's just bring it on. So the learning curve is steep, but you're highly motivated, and you definitely get into almost a flow, and you're just absorbing information. And yeah, I look back on that. I certainly, now that we have children, and I would love for them to come into the business. They're younger. Our oldest is only 15, but I certainly see the wisdom in having them go outside of our business for a while, if they're interested in our business, to go
Yeah.
pursue it with somewhere else, to learn on their own, and gather insight and perspective, and hone a passion before they kind of come back to us.
Yeah, and I think that that sponge mindset that you described, that's the power of doing your passion.
Right.
And, for some people, they find it right away, like you did, and other people, it takes a little bit of time. But doing what you love, not doing it for money, is
Yeah.
the most motivating force out there, above anything. And I think that's a misconception in our society this day and age. Everybody's like, "Oh, an entrepreneur, you must be making tons of money," or "Boy, you're going to be rich." And, if you're doing it for the money, you
Yeah.
better find a different motivating factor. And I'm sure you can attest to this, because it's not going to take you through the long nights and the challenges that you're going to go through. And I want to get to some of the challenges in the winery industry that are far greater than a lot of other industries, certainly industries that I've been in, because there's so many things outside of your control. But to that point, if your motivating force is money,
Yeah,
find
you
something
said such
else.
a great thing, truly, sincerely. Like it can't be. It has to be a passion. You look at anybody, any great whatever. Very rare that they got in it for the money. It was just a curiosity, a passion to discover and explore and push, and they had success. And so sometimes money comes with that. But
Yeah.
yes, I would, anybody listening, pursue the passion. Be willing to sacrifice a lot for a long time. That's one thing my father really did. I mean, when I look at the things that my father instilled in us, this concept of delayed gratification, from the time I was a child, he talked about that. That it's not about right now; it's about what you're building. Think long term. Don't get caught up in the right now. And looking at what it's taken us 23 years to build, I'm glad he started teaching that at an early age, because
Well,
we have lived that one out.
yeah, well, and that's such excellent advice, Mark, that your dad passed to you and that you're passing to us, because in this day and age, when everything is at our fingertips, and there's no such thing as delayed gratification for information or for ordering food or for renting an Airbnb, we're basically rewiring our brains to the very opposite of some of the skill sets that you need to be
Yep.
successful as an entrepreneur and in business.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's so hard to, I think we all struggle with that, because so many things come so quickly for us. You really do have to work at reminding yourself, this is a marathon, not a race.
Yep.
Delayed gratification, patience brings good things to those who are willing to wait for it.
I mean, we go on and on, but you have to be able to kind of like sit with these almost sometimes competing ideas, because as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a builder of a business, you have to be flexible, and you have to be dynamic, and you have to be um nimble, but at the same time, you can't be just reactive all the time. You really do have to have a, ultimately a vision and a real belief in what you're building and where you're going. And yes, you make these course corrections over time, but you just can't get caught up if things aren't immediately going as fast as you like them, the success you're hoping to have. It takes, unfortunately, and man, I hope we circle back or keep talking about this, because this really is a theme that's going to come back up um, later in our story as we get into winemaking, and when my brother and I actually purchased the business, and this huge moment in my life where I had to learn patience, and I had to learn to say no and to slow down in order for us to really move forward as a business. We'll get to there, but I want to make sure we circle back to that. So
Yeah,
remember
that's such a great segue, Mark, because that's exactly where I want to go. So 2002, you guys as a family decide, okay, we've been growing grapes. We're working with a vineyard management company. Where we see this and where we want to take this is the next step of not just growing our grapes and selling it to other people to make wine, which
right,
is what you were doing, but
correct.
growing our grapes and utilizing it for ourselves and making our own wine, which is a whole nother step and level of capital input and infusion to do. Tell us about those days and tell us that second chapter. As you described, there's three primary chapters or
Mhm.
three chapters, that second chapter of going from grape growing to winemaking in 2002.
I think about it kind of like this: that just because you have a lumber yard doesn't mean you're necessarily a great home builder, right? So
That's a
you
great
know,
analogy.
we've got these grapes, the raw material, but making something out of that is a very different skill set. I think as we grew grapes and had a anything that you've done, you've built, you've poured a years of worth of money and time and effort and emotion into this crop, and you put on the back of somebody else's trailer and it drives away. Yes, there's a sense of like completion, but there's a sense of like the process isn't done yet.
Yeah.
Like something new is about to start with that. And eventually, at least for us, like you wanted to do that. Like people get excited about the bottle of wine. There's not people just like stoked about a half ton picking bin of Pinot Noir, right? So
Oh, look at that truck full of grapes. Boy,
oh, right.
that's beautiful.
So and that kind of was all coinciding with my time spent in this industry now, and wanting to start something as a family business, and realizing that financially we probably weren't in a situation where we could just continue to buy acres and acres of land and become a large a grape growing operation. Is when my parents started looking at making wine under the Arista label. So 2002, my parents launched the brand. Um, Initially, my uncle John was kind of involved in that. Again, very influential in my life, and a guy that we couldn't be here today had he not really helped kind of show us the ropes. But it was obvious very early on that he didn't want to be involved in the business long term, and so he kind of helped get us pointed in the right direction. And then it was in 2000. So launched the brand in '02. Um, just as a side here, just as I am now meeting who is my wife, she was living in Texas at the time. I was in California, of course, and so right as the business is launching, I moved to Dallas, ultimately to get engaged, get married, and then my wife and I moved back, I think, in 2004. So
And
that's
what's
that
your wife's name?
Jennifer.
Okay. Yep.
And so that's that little period there where my father and my uncle really were kind of day to day running this new winery that we launched, because I was young, getting married, trying to convince a new bride to move back to California with
Yeah.
me.
What
Uh,
prompted you to go back to Dallas?
what prompted me?
Yeah, to go to Dallas.
Jennifer. She was living in
Okay.
Dallas. She was
Okay.
working in a children's hospital, and it was pretty obvious to us that it would be easier for me to put my life on hold for a moment than her trying to find a children's hospital out here. It just wasn't going
Okay.
to work that way.
Yeah.
But, opportunity, and we just discussed this. I use that. So anybody listening, I use that 2-year period to move to Dallas. I spent 1 year kind of oddly working for Kinko's, but it was being acquired by FedEx in their corporate office. And so I got to spend 1 year on this like management fast tracking program where I would spend a quarter in a different department kind of in the corporate office. And it was great management experience, just
Talk about incredible
very
experience that you'd
high
use
level
later.
stuff that I like. I knew at the time it was important. I didn't realize how important it would be. So I spent a year doing that, and number one, learned that I did not need to be in corporate America, which was a really important lesson. Um, but I did learn a lot. But then I knew it was time to get out of that because that was not my cup of tea.
Sure.
So I went to work for a wine distributor that was based in Dallas because I realized we were starting a winery. I understood that there was a distribution side of the business. I didn't know what that was. I certainly had never had any exposure to it, but realized that that would be an important skill set to have because I knew I was going to be the guy running the winery. And so I spent a little over a year, about maybe 18 months, working for this distributor just as a sales rep, selling wine, but definitely learning the lingo, the relationships that suppliers and distributors had, et cetera. And then convinced my wife to let's move back. It was honestly time. I needed to be there because my uncle was ready to get out of the business. It was time for me to move to California full time, and it really began to help take over the business. And so that we did
What
that
year was that?
2004,
2004. Okay.
maybe mid 2004,
Okay.
kind of summer of 2004, I believe. At that point, like this is the point in our story where it's kind of scary, and I will say that of the entire Arista story, probably the scariest, most over my head, overwhelmed part of that story happened right then because as my uncle left, um, it was definitely I got thrown to the fire. There was not a lot because he moved. He and his wife moved to Birmingham, Alabama. They were
Oh,
starting another
wow.
business, so it really was like, "Hey, man, good luck. Go get them." And I moved to California not knowing who all of our growers were. At least I'd never met them. I didn't know how to order glass, corks, foils, labels. I didn't know how to call a mobile bottling line to come in and bottle. I didn't know anything. I
Yeah.
didn't know anything. And I mean, I think that's an important part of kind of being an entrepreneur too, is like at some point you just have to jump in, man, and you got to go for it. That was kind of the burn the ships moment for me. There was no turning back. I was all in. Um, when you're scared, truly scared, panicky, and don't know what to do, for me, number one, religion's very important, but
Yeah.
number two, I think sometimes being young and totally being obviously overwhelmed and going to people that I looked at in this industry as leaders, as guys and gals that I looked up to and wanted to be like, I think going in there humbly to them and just asking genuinely, not like gratuitous token wisdom, but like I need help. I think in my industry at least, there was a lot of people who were really willing to offer support, encouragement, make introductions, and really help us along. And I am forever grateful for that. I try my best now, 20 years later, to do the same thing for young people that are starting out. But it sounds so cliched, but my wife and I, for the following 2 or 3 years, with no exaggeration, worked 7 days a week for years. We're newlyweds, we have no kids, we're living in California. There's like all of this amazing Yosemite, all these. We never got to go to them ever as young newlyweds with no kids because you worked all week. That's when the
Yeah.
work happened. But then we have a little tasting room, and that's open on the weekends, and that's when all the customers come, right? And so you're there 7 days a week. But you're young, and you've got the energy, and you back to that passion, and you that point where if you don't have the passion driving you, you'll get burned out very easily, at least in my opinion. And so we had an awesome but like hair raising 2 or 3 years as we tried to kind of figure out the business and get our footing. And fortunately, we were able to.
Yeah. Mark, I mean, thank you so much for sharing that story because it is one of the most empowering type of stories to hear. There's a couple things I want to point out there that you talked about. Last week we had a podcast on overcoming fear and failure.
Mhm.
And one of the key aspects there was something you just described. And I've heard it from so many entrepreneurs like yourself of they were thrown in there trial by fire and they had no other option but to figure it out. And the other key thing that you said there is you made yourself vulnerable. So many times in this society, especially for us as men, we're afraid to say, I need help, or I don't know how to do this, or I'm in way over my head. And just being able to do that to other people, even competitors, and for me and my business partner Jeff, it was certainly true. We went to a competitor who was tremendously helpful for us, just saying, we need help. And that's exactly what you did
Yeah,
with people throughout the industry. And more often than not, people are like, someone helped me along the line. I want to help you. Now, you have some people that aren't like that, but
of
in
course.
general, all of my experiences indicate that's the complete opposite. But you have to be willing to ask for the help. And you said something really, really key. Genuinely ask for the help.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I think people, authenticness, genuineness when you see it, and unless you just don't have a heart, I mean, you don't have to give the trade secrets,
Right.
but, like, I think most people love to be approached when they're viewed as successful or holder of information, and somebody need, like, people want to help, I think, but not if they can sense that it's inauthentic, or you're just,
Exactly.
that you are viewing them as a stepping stone along your way. I think, I think you have to be authentic and genuine. I think too, there's this, term that I've come across at some point in my life that kind of resonates hard with me, is radical acceptance. Just like an ability to truly accept the situation, the conditions. Like, these are the ground conditions. And I think if you can't, it's not always going to be pretty. It's not always record sales. It's not always, all the accolades. I mean, there's a lot of down, there's a lot of hard, there's a lot of grind, there's a lot of, like, it's not going according to plan. And I think if you can't be real about your situation, I mean, I think you're destined for failure at that point. So just accepting, look, this is a tough situation that we are in, and if I was smart enough and could do it all on my own, I would have done it. But, like, I knew I needed help.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And I love what you said, religion, very, very important for me as well.
yep,
And you said what helped get you and Jennifer through it, especially being newlyweds. I mean, that's challenging enough, sharing your life with someone else. You just moved to California and now you're trying to grow this very capital intensive business.
yeah,
And I think even for me, and this is why I love this so much, getting to talk with other entrepreneurs like you and hear their story, it's so motivating because we all have days of weakness where we're like, what did I get myself into? Or how in the world am I going to get out of this? And when you hear the struggles other people are going through, which is exactly the point of this podcast, and how you got through it, and those words of encouragement, and that it is hard for everybody, even though things on the outside may look glamorous, but that in reality, we're all going through similar experiences, whether it's in a different industry or different points throughout our life cycle. That's so incredibly motivating
yeah,
for
yeah,
you and Jennifer. Obviously, those years were really, really tough. You just gave us an idea of how you got through it. And I love that what the other thing that you said about acceptance. I think too many times in this day and age, we get stuck on focusing on the negative and we whine and we complain rather than just saying, okay, this is my reality. It's not the reality I want, but it's the reality I have. I know where I want to go. So let's figure out how do I get from point A to point B and just break it down as simply as that. But you have to accept your reality today
mhm,
and figure out a way to move forward.
yes, absolutely.
Eh, Now, for you guys, when did you and your brother, Ben,
Hmm.
uh, and your whole collective family, you and Jennifer and Ben, and what Ben is married, correct?
Tatiana. Uh-huh.
Tatiana, when did you guys decide to buy the business from your family? And is that the next chapter? And if we've
Yep.
skipped anything
Yeah.
in chapter two, don't hesitate to,
Yeah.
to
Just
complete that.
like the in chapter two, I kind of look at chapter two for us as 2002 until 2012. Um, and it's that period of time where we grew a business organically. This is like, again, back to maybe a weakness of ours at the time that we are trying to correct still to this day. But nobody in my family went to business school. Nobody had these strong um, the business mind. We kind of grew, and we were
Sure.
in a time where Pinot Noir in California in the U.S. was wildly popular. The whole Sideways movie that came out in, I think it was 2005, had a massive impact. You talk about all these external factors on any industry. It's not just my industry, but in my industry, that was this massive external kind of black swan, whatever you want to call it, where prior to that movie, I mean, I can't overstate the impact that that movie had on my life.
So Sideways is the movie
Sideways,
you're talking about?
yes, Rex Pickett's
O
Sideways.
okay, I've not seen it, and they focused on Pinot
Oh,
Noirs, which is Arista's specialty
that's correct. We
type
make
of
Pinot
wine.
and Chard, and it was only 20 years ago, but just 20 years ago, it's kind of hard to believe that Pinot Noir really was kind of the weird kid in the corner doing its own thing. It was not what it
Really?
is today. And if you were focused on Pinot Noir when we were starting, certainly guys that were a generation before me, you talking about doing something for love and passion. It hadn't been discovered yet as a grape variety. And this movie comes out, and I mean, overnight, it I can't tell you the thousands of people that just showed up looking for Pinot Noir, and so that helped us out. But my point there is, we just kind of were organically growing. It was fun. It was still, in a sense, a very college experience of like discovery and like we're making wine and this is cool and let's go make Zinfandel. Let's try Chardonnay. Syrah sounds fun. Let's go up to Oregon. Let's go down to the Santa Cruz Mountains. And it just there was a lot of like wide-eyed yes going on.
Yeah.
And fortunately, so as I kind of try to weave some of the business side, my father, a lot of the wisdom that he had came from like a conservative side of being a business guy, that he didn't understand the distribution side of the industry. He really wanted to focus on, so in the wine world, there's really kind of two main channels of sales. It would be direct to consumer and then to trade or business or wholesale. He didn't understand the wholesale side. So our early on, we really set the business up to be pretty much predominantly direct to consumer out of our tasting room, which
Mhm.
is in the little town of Healdsburg, California, on a really famous stretch of land called West Side Road. We're surrounded by some of the most iconic brands in our industry, and that alone, that's a story, kind of how we even discovered what is our home. But we had the fortune of buying our 36 acres of land, planting that, and this is all in that kind of '02 to 2012. Buy the land, plant the vineyard, open the tasting room, grow our production, really let our sales kind of drive our growth. And we found ourselves in 2012. We had if and that was a very large vintage in California, a huge vintage. Had we turned into wine all of the grapes that we harvested that year, because we ended up selling, so it was just so much fruit, we would have made about 15,000 cases of wine that year, which it scares me to death to realize how big we had gotten in such a short period of time.
What's an average year of the number of
Today we
cases of
make
wine you would
6 to 7,000 cases of wine. I mean, yeah,
Wow.
which 15,000 cases is still, in the scheme of things, a drop in the bucket, but
No, but for your business, that would be more than doubling
double.
what
Yes,
an average year looks like. I mean, that's if any
honestly.
business tried to double, that would be wow.
And we certainly didn't have the demand for like, and we didn't have the other channel, the distribution channel. And so that's really what kind of forced it, not for it, it's part of the business. You often sell excess grapes or wine kind of on a bulk market. So that was not unusual. But the point being, at the end of the 2012 vintage, we had the potential to be a much larger brand. And not because of that, but just because of time. It was that same time that my father came to me and my brother, and because of some conversations that we were having as a family, kind of led up to 2012. My father saying, "Hey, I'm ready to retire. I'm ready to turn the business over to you guys." This is kind of a fun part of the story too. My brother and I think, were anticipating more of a handoff, and he was anticipating more of an acquisition.
Ah.
so, so we kind of we worked through that one as a family. But I'm glad my father did that now, because I do think that the skin in the game is another important part of, kind of back to that entrepreneurial. Like, if you don't really feel the risk, if you don't really feel the real, like, the reality that failure is right there, I think that you maybe lack some of the drive, the hunger, the motivation. Like, it's one of those, like, failure is not an option. Like failure is failure, at that point. And
Yeah, I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. So what you're saying is, from when your parents had purchased the land in 1992, you started Arista in 2002 up until 2012, while you and your brother and your wife and your brother's wife were involved in the
working for the
operations.
family,
And what's that?
working for the family.
Yeah, working for the family. It was still, at the end of the day, it was still your parents. And if there was a net loss, they had to figure out how to cover it. And if there was net profit, they got the benefit. And it wasn't until 2012 when your dad Al would wanted to sell it to you, meaning you guys take on the full responsibility of your actions every year, and you
Yes,
and your brother were thinking about, they just kind of transition in a certain way,
right,
that you
right.
really realized, are we going to do this? Are we going to do this? Take it to the next level with our generation.
Exactly. And I think any generational transition, that's it's so cliche, but it's so true. It's like, we literally are younger and just have a different horizon, a different perspective. It's kind of all my brother and I had ever done as adults is worked in the industry, where my father was an orthodontist. So we just very different perspectives.
Hmm.
My parents had done, just an amazing job of laying the foundation for success for us. Um, just
But
with
that had to be terrifying.
Oh, yeah. No, 100%. Because what the next chapter, I'm about to probably write a book on what not to do as a business owner. So if you're just kind of coming in and out, you might want to pay attention of how not to do business
Oh, I've
moves.
got 3 of those books. Oh.
So, so the way that transition kind of came about was my brother and I really were driving hard towards my father about building our own winery on the estate. So, for a lot of people who are listening, maybe don't understand kind of the nuance of the industry. You can be a vineyard or you're a winery. You've got vineyards and you have a production facility, a winery building. There's a lot of, like, iterations of that though, and a lot of people, in the industry, because having land and building a winery is a very, very expensive endeavor. For a lot of wineries out there, there's this concept of, like, custom crush, or think of it almost as, like, as a co-op, in the sense that it's one person's building. You pay rent there. You get to use their equipment, use their team. It's a way to cost share, and it's really common for small brands to do. And it's
Mhm.
what we were for, from '02 until 2012. We made our wine in someone else's home, and that alone, kind of tangents here, that alone really dictates, um, some business decisions for you. When
Sure.
when you're using somebody else's equipment, in a sense, it begins to determine the style of wine that you're going to make, only because, in our world, we deal under the microscope with all sorts of bacteria, yeast, and just microbes. And so when sanitization is a really important part of winemaking. And when you're in a shared facility with a bunch of different, chefs in the kitchen, you're kind of going to only be as clean as the dirtiest person is in that.
Yeah.
And so you end up having to make some very conservative wine. There's, more intervention. There's filtering and fining, and just, you're being safe because you don't know. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of great wines made in that environment, but it's a safer style.
Yeah, you can't really experiment and find your own style, because to do so would be to risk the health potentially,
Right.
given what you
Of your
just
product, and
described.
something could go wrong, and now
Yeah.
you've made a bad mistake, right? And so,
Yeah.
we wanted to build our own winery. We were ready to kind of My brother and I felt like we were ready to move into a new phase, new chapter of Arista's existence, where we had our own production facility. And my father finally, at the end of the 2012 vintage, came to us and said, "You know what, guys, you're right. We've had these conversations, and I've just kind of your mom and I have talked, and we just really feel like you guys need to build a winery. We don't. Like, at our age, this is not anything that we need to do. We will have your back and support you, but this is something that you're young, you can go into debt and figure this out. And that really was the impetus that started the transition of ownership. And so over a few months, we worked out kind of the details, and my brother and I took over the business, and really kind of we look at that as January 1st of 2013 is when kind of this Arista 2.0 began.
And
And
now it was yours. It was entirely you. You're successful. You get the benefits. You fail. You get all the consequences at that point.
that's
Correct?
right. My parents retained about a 10% ownership in the business, but this 45-45, me and Ben. And you're right, you're in the big chair now. And so there's a lot
Yeah.
of like decisions that we'd always kind of wanted to make, and now you get to make those. And so I mean, are you ready? We can dive in because this to me is probably the most exciting, the most fun like chapter of it all.
Yes.
So,
Let's dive in because now I first off I love what you described, and I don't think I've had conversations with people who, because they weren't put in this position where they have skin in the game and they ultimately bear the benefit or consequence of the decisions they make, whether it's in a family business or whether you're in a large corporation. That's not really something you can understand the weight of that responsibility when you are making the decisions and how it changes your mindset until it is truly indeed every single employee is your responsibility. Every dollar that comes in the door, goes out the door is your responsibility. And you're going to either make good decisions and it's going to go successful, and you're going to make some bad decisions, it's going to fail. And so that's the chapter we're just entering for you and for Ben, correct?
right, that's exactly right.
Let's dive in.
So we had, I would say, a modicum of success, not financially, but like in terms of some recognition in the industry in that 2002 until 2012, where we were becoming kind of known, but in the scheme of things, Arista in 2012, we weren't big, we weren't small, we weren't good, we weren't bad. We were just this nice little brand on West Side Road that you could come and visit and have a pretty tasting room, and we would make as much as we could sell, and the business was just kind of moving along. But when my when my brother and I would taste our wines against a competitive or aspirational set of wines, brands that we admired, brands that we wanted to be like, I think back to that radical acceptance and just being objective about your business. When we would taste our wines against a competitive set, it was pretty obvious that our wines weren't in that same league. And
Mhm.
I'm a competitive guy. I mean, I've always been in sports and athletics, and I'm just kind of driven that way. And it was frustrating because I mean, I thought we were doing everything we possibly could. We certainly wasn't for lack of trying. So, you know, radical acceptance. Okay, Ben, like we got a lot of things in our favor. We have this amazing estate. We have these great vineyards. There's no question about it. Like what's going wrong? And as you begin to kind of point to it, it was winemaking, and that was me and this great gal, a consultant that we had for a long time. She was a great gal, but as we kind of looked at all the pieces of the puzzle, we kind of began to like zero in on like we can do better at the winemaking level. And so, kind of first major decision that Ben and I make as owning the company now is we need to make some radical changes at winemaking. And we looked at this as one opportunity. Like we just didn't have gas in the tank to spend years trying to kind of figure this out. We had to get it right coming out of the gates. And so it's a long story I won't get into, but we were introduced to who is now ultimately our winemaker. His name is Matt Courtney. And he'd come from a really, really famous brand out on the Sonoma coast, a brand called Marcusson. Wonderful wines, kind of iconic wines. Highly talented guy. And we hire Matt. And I'm pausing because I remember I was reading a book at the time called Essentialism: The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And again, I go back to my faith, and I don't think things are just totally random. I do think things happen for a reason and a time. But I'm reading this book about essentialism and how you strip away the noise and how you focus your effort on one thing as opposed to being pulled into 100 different directions and doing like 100 things. Can you focus on one or two things and do them exceptionally well? all that's happening as we hire Matt. And so Matt comes in and says, okay, if you guys want to be as great as you say you want to be, there's a lot that has to change here. We got to strip away a lot of noise. There's some great parts here, but there's a lot of work, and it's not going to feel good and it's going to hurt for a while. But here's what we're going to have to do. And I'll get into that. But that was like what I needed to hear. That was that hardest first decision was making this change at winemaking, bringing him in, and the cascade of decisions now that were going to occur weren't always easy, but we began to have more and more refined focus. It was laser sharp that we had a mission and a purpose, that we were going to make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay from the Russian River Valley. And as crazy as that sounds, as obvious as that sounds, that's not where we were in that moment. We were making wines out of Oregon all the way down to the Santa Cruz Mountains. We were making probably 8 or 9 different varieties of wine. We had price points all over the place. We were just kind of we were a mess. We needed focus. We needed purpose. And that's what he began to bring to us.
Yeah, I love everything you're talking about, and I believe that every business at multiple stages, but particularly the beginning stages, which is really what this was for you and for Ben, taking it over from your parents, is you become something in the first few years, and you're doing anything you can to learn the business, learn the industry, make connections, bring revenue in, try to
Right.
keep the lights on,
Yeah. Right.
anything and everything. And you get to this point where you take a step back and you look and you're doing all these things, and as you described it, it's kind of all scatterbrained, and you're making wine, but you don't have an identity. You don't have a true identity of, and in this case, who is Arista? What do we stand for? What are we known for? And I love how honest you were about, sometimes when you recognize that, number one, you have to be willing to open your eyes and recognize it if you truly want to establish an identity. And number two, some of the things you have to do to get there maybe aren't fun and you want to try to ignore them, but that will only complicate the problem.
Yeah.
And you guys clearly saw this and said, and I love the other piece, you guys were open to honest feedback. You tasted your wine and you tasted some of your competitors' wine that you appreciated, and you were just honest and said, ours just isn't as good, but I know it can be.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the identity discovering process that you're describing. And it doesn't matter what business you're in or what industry, every single business, especially new businesses, if you will, and even quite frankly, some maturing businesses and maturing industries should do this.
Yeah.
But tying back to, you didn't want to be in the corporate world, that's almost impossible when you get 5 or 6 layers of bureaucracy to be able to have that honest conversation and just real honest feedback and rediscovering your identity, which is necessary as technology changes and we move across centuries. But you guys identified that, and now walk us through those decisions. You made that first
Yeah.
challenging, separating with the previous winemaker, finding someone that was honest for you, not a yes person, but said, if you guys want to accomplish this, it's not going to be fun and you're not going to like what I'm going to tell you, but this is what you need to do. And you guys listened to that constructive feedback, and then you started making the decisions based on his experience and recommendations.
Yep. I can't tell you, these are just my experiences. Other people have maybe different experiences, but for me, I cannot tell you how important starting with really great people on your team. And it sounds cliched, but I'm just telling you, like, once we began to thoughtfully assemble kind of this new team, and Ben and I really began to evolve and understand kind of our role, uh, was, I mean, I wish it was like, it'd be fun if I was the winemaker and I was the grape grower and it's all about me. I mean, there's the ego involved in that, right? But
Yeah.
that just wasn't it. That wasn't my skill set. But maybe my skill set, or what Ben and I began to realize, is what our role was really going to be was, how do we assemble a team of exceptionally talented people at various roles? How do you put, and I really, I think about, I'm a sports guy, I think about sports teams all the time. You know, it really was. And of course, I'm from Texas. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, and
Oh,
I hope
oh,
Jerry Jones is listening, because he
uh,
drives me crazy, because I
oh,
began to look at my role as like an owner of a team, right? And so I look at a guy like Jerry Jones. I'm like, what an idiot! He tries to make it all about him. Every decision is about him. He's in the draft room. He's on the sideline. He's doing post game. And like, dude, just shut up. Get out of the way. Let your team that you pay and draft and put together, let them do their job. Put the ego aside. So I look at a guy like Robert Kraft with the Patriots, who kind of in my mind did that. Like he would just
Yeah.
go to the best team, sit up in the owner's box and just count rings. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that became my role. And so we hire Matt, put a lot of trust in him. And all these kind of following decisions, people that we hired, an assistant winemaker, a cellar master, were like turned out to be incredible people. With other parts of our business, we were really bringing some talented people together. And I think a part of it was like there was an excitement. It was scary back to that. Like I can almost, it mirrors those first few years when I was thrown in 2004 or five and literally had no clue what I was doing. It's almost like that again, but this time, like I understood a lot more. And
Yeah.
now I could see that we had the pieces of the puzzle were on the table now, and it was just figuring out how to really, it was exciting. There was in this time it was more compressed as things really started happening faster because like we knew what we were doing, and that goes back to a business. Like have your purpose, have your mission, be so clear what you're doing, why you're doing it, because if you could keep going back to that, like it removes a lot of the doubt, ambiguity. Like, no, this is what we are doing. Everybody bought in. Everybody believed in that, and it really just it took some time, but you start getting this kind of positive momentum, this inertia, and the business. So we went. This is the things to not do in business. We went from 15,000 cases down to 5,000 cases. We got rid of so many great contracts in 1 year. Just really reduced ourselves down to those two great varieties. We rebrand, like new packaging, repackaged the label. Just we made some radical change. We went from custom crush. So that's the kind of funny part of the story. One of the things that Matt was like, okay, you want to make wine like the big boys do at the high level, you got to move out of custom crush. We need to have our own winery. And my brother and I kind of laughed, like, well, we just bought this business from our parents, so we certainly don't have any money to build a winery now.
And custom crush again is where you're sharing a winery with
Paying rent
other.
to make wine at somebody else's home,
Okay. Okay.
right? And so, but back to like the startup mode of the business and the fun, and back to sleeping on the floor and just like almost starting anew. What we found was this old warehouse. It was a corrugated metal building in Cloverdale, California. You would never want to take anybody there. There was absolutely nothing redeeming about it. It was a corrugated metal industrial strip mall, but it was ours. And so what we could afford to do on a line of credit was go out and buy all new tanks, hoses, pumps, presses, sorting tables, crusher, destemmer, all this, the guts, the equipment, the stuff that you need to make wine, because we were always using somebody else's. We didn't have that,
Hmm.
so we had to go buy that. So we knew, okay, well, we can buy this nice equipment, we can stick it inside this little metal shack, and one day, Lord willing, we'd be able to build our own winery. We could take that equipment and put it in the winery. And so, with that line of credit, we went out and bought all this equipment and moved into this little warehouse. And honestly, it was as line in the sand restart as you can imagine. We went from like we were cutting the umbilical cord and we're flying on our own, man. It was just little Arista. We were a group of five on the kind of the winemaking team. We had our own facility. We were now got rid of all these crazy varieties and stuff that we were doing, and we were making Pinot and Chard, and it it was so liberating. It allowed
Yeah.
us to begin to make wine in a way that we never made wine, not like reckless and crazy, just on a much more artisanal,
Yeah.
handcrafted level.
Make it yours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Now, so you bought it in 2012, and how long? What's the time period when you guys bought this building and all this new equipment and had your own winery essentially there?
I mean,
What was
so
that?
we took over the business January 1st of 2013 and had to be operational in that new facility by August of 2013. So what,
Wow.
is that 8 months, something like
Yeah,
that, which is
that's fast.
crazy, crazy pants to be able to find the place, get construction, because it was a warehouse. It was not a winery. I mean, it was just a warehouse that needed to be converted. The right type of plumbing, chilling, air handling had to be installed. Drains had to be cut. All the massive equipment had to be ordered and delivered. I mean, it was
Huge undertaking. I don't even know
all
how
this
you got
crazy.
permits and all that crazy thing that fast. I mean, that's a testament to your guys' willpower.
It was all hands on deck, man, to make that happen.
So when you say things not to do, it sounds like cutting from 15,000 back to 5,000, uh, which I understood as you've described it, part of the process of really discovering your identity, focusing on your purpose and your mission. But it sounded like there was a hint of regret there. Is that true? Or it was regretful that it had to be done, but you recognize it had to be done to ultimately get where you wanted to go?
Yeah, I guess when I say not to do it, if I could do it again, would I do it as radically?
Okay.
What I didn't think, what we weren't, we were so, for better or for worse, we were so excited and focused, and we knew how, like, we knew the potential that we had, and we knew what we were about to be able to do. More from a revenue, from the business side of going from 15 down to 5 in like 1 year, and not thinking about like the 3-4 year impact on
Yeah.
revenue that was going to have was crazy. Taking on all of these expenses in 1 year of all that equipment, rebranding, just like we, but it was the rip the Band-Aid, man. I mean, and so back to tightening the belt for several years to just kind of get through that. There's a bit of liberation behind it. Like, we just kind of cathartically purged and hard reset. Um, yeah, I mean, it was
You
tough.
did what you had to do, and it
Really.
wasn't fun and it wasn't easy, but you guys did it. And you would do things a little bit differently, but look at where you are today because of it.
Right. I would have maybe tapered a little bit more slowly, but honestly, that I would say the reason we couldn't do that is because you had to back to burn the ships, man. Like, there was no turning back, and well,
Yeah.
so if you start tapering it, you can't kind of halfway start doing making wine the way we're making it. You couldn't, like, it's a hard stop, and so we just said, let's just do it, man. We're just going to reset, and we will figure out how to weather the next several years. Um, and yeah, that's what we've done. And the point that I want to make, not to ramble on too much, but I told you I wanted to circle all the way back. Um, was this, Matt, our winemaker, was a philosophy major at Berkeley, and I was not a philosophy major. And our personalities are very opposite, but I think we've been wonderful for each other. I'm the rah rah rah. Let's get everybody hyped up. Let's go run through the wall. Like, I'm ready to make decisions. I'm ready to act. I'm ready to be decisive and kind of go. And Matt is a very measure twice, cut once kind of guy. And so the learning that I had to do in this process, kind of 2013, 14, 15, the what he began to teach me was how actually rare in our world, but how kind of almost sexy this idea of slowing down, being patient, waiting for this process, the building of this anticipation, that the acceptance that if you're going to make a truly crafted fill in the blank, I mean, it could be a shoe, a purse, a bottle of wine, a whatever, that there's a reason that handcrafted things are desirable, are generally more expensive, but the quality that you're getting, that's your trade-off there. And that in our world where it's just move move move, we really have made a conscious decision in a lot of ways to step back and to slow down and to kind of embrace a more traditional style of growing grapes and making wine. And you can't rush that along, but that began to be kind of part of our DNA about, like, every aspect of our business, like, slow down, like our hospitality. And that whole book I was reading, the less but better, we business decision here, we chose to, instead of being open to the public 7 days a week, take all comers, just wild bar scene at the tasting room, we shut our doors. We went to tasting by appointment as a way to kind of slow down the volume of people coming in so that we could begin to focus these tasting experiences in a more custom and a more tailored way where we had the opportunity to sit down with our guests for an hour, hour and a half and kind of walk through all this stuff that like what makes your wines different. Why are your wines the way they are? You can't I mean, here we are an hour and a half into this conversation. I mean just it this is a process, and
Yeah.
so why would we work so hard to make this product and then just kind of pour it like a cocktail at a bar and people are like we everything has to kind of fall in line. Everything has to um, point towards the same belief or model or kind of what we're driving at. And so all the aspects of our business began to slow down, and we really began to think about the experience and how you tailor this and how you build how everything's pointing to kind of our core. And that was a radical change to our business model because revenue dipped for a year or two. We were we just were seeing fewer people, but our belief was that we would begin to see better people, quality people, people who truly appreciated the product, the experience, understood why it cost more, but also understood the quality they were getting. And what we know about our business is it's more than a bottle of wine. I mean, I tell my staff that all the time. You're not selling a bottle of wine. Like this is a special part of the world people come to buy into this much bigger idea of what we're doing here. So you got to sell that. You have to understand that they're not here. I'm going to lose all day long if it's just a bottle of wine and the price point. That's not my game.
Yeah.
It's the quality, it's the story, it's the attention to detail. It is the no stone left unturned that people appreciate, and we want to be able to sit with people and explain that process. So that was kind of a
Mark,
bit of a
oh,
ramble there.
yeah, well, I think if more companies took the methodical, deliberate approach that you've just described, and I'm very much like you, I'm a go-getter. Let's move, move, move. Why can't it happen yesterday? Why hasn't it happened yesterday? We're not doing this right. We got to change. Let's move, move, move. And I'm still learning this, but I think as we just in life, as we get older, we mature, we have these experiences I've used you have described, and as we have other people who help us see the finer things, what I like to consider the finer things in life, they really do take a deliberate and a methodical approach. And I know that yours is working. I've myself had the opportunity to experience a wine tasting event at Arista, and not only Mark is the wine amazing, and I think you guys have done an incredible job. And if I didn't think this, I would tell
Sure.
you to your
Yeah,
face, yeah, you need to work. But I think the other thing that a lot of people miss is the story behind it. You and Jennifer and Ben and his wife and the whole story. I remember sitting there, and I remember exactly where I was sitting, and we were there, as you recall, for Adam's bachelor
yeah,
party. We were in Napa Valley, and listening to you, and the authenticity and the passion was like just a book wide open.
hmm
And it's quite frankly why we're having this conversation together or today, and why I've always enjoyed talking with you because obviously, as you've just described, you learned the importance of authenticity. Not that you weren't ever authentic, but you get what I'm saying. A lot of people in business don't understand you've got to walk before you can run, and you've got to be authentic while you're doing it. You have to be vulnerable, and you have to appreciate it and really understand what are you trying to bring to the marketplace, and who are you as a brand. And that's just not as a company, but as an individual ownership group as well.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think consumers want that in any part of life, any product. I mean, there needs to or at least you're more curious. You're more inspired by
Yeah.
people that are passionate about whatever it is that they're doing. And I just kind of feel like at the luxury level, people want to know what they're getting and why. And you can sniff out a fraud, a fake, kind of a corporate marketing line in a few minutes. You
Yeah.
quickly. Or the flip side of that is when you meet those people who you can tell, like anybody who's here or not, they're doing it the same exact way, man. They are n- like almost oblivious to what's going on around them. They are so passionate about what they do. That becomes infectious. You want to be a part of that. You want to be around that. And I think we all at Arista, we all feel very lucky that this is kind of where we've all found ourselves. We kind of have, birds of a feather, I guess. You kind of assemble an amazingly talented group of people. And that, I mean, but that's like the first step. That doesn't, this like
Yeah.
that's not the secret. Then you got to
No.
do the hard work, right?
Yeah, it takes a lot of work, but to your point, I think as you described, people can also tell when you rush through something, whether it doesn't matter what industry or whether you're, luxury certainly, but across all industries, if the business is just rushing through a product or don't care about quality or don't understand taking the time to get things right, oh, that's as plain as the sky is blue as well. Not only the personality of the people, but the care that you take and the quality or appreciation you have for your product.
Right. I agree.
Now, you've been very, very gracious with your time. So,
Sure.
just a few more questions for you. Where is Arista today? There's so much that I want to talk about, but this could be 4 hours long based on conversations you and I have. Fires, uncontrollable factors, things in your industry that you know I can't even imagine operating under. But I'll cover those with a few questions in just a bit. But where is Arista? Where are you guys in your life cycle? What are you guys aiming to accomplish? It sounds like you were primarily direct to consumer, and you and your brother, when you took over, worked to a large degree to open the wholesale revenue side of the business. Talk to us about how you guys have developed,
Yep.
not only from a business perspective, and where you're planning on going as well.
Yeah, so it's funny. I was just, let's see, I was in Chicago last week for work, and I was at a lunch with several somms from, some great restaurants in the city. And like you have your routine, you got your spill, you do kind of fall into the salesy side of things. And like I told, like maybe you talked about my honesty or my transparency, like mid spill, I just start laughing, and I'm like, I got to be honest with you guys, I got to change this story. This is crazy because we Arista for since 2013, the story has been about like where we're going and the future, and so much of what I talked about was always about the promise of where we're going, like stick with us, here's where we're going. But like in that moment last week in Chicago, I'm like, dude, we're 10 years into this now. Like I've got 10 years of product to point to. I guess we're kind of in this moment where we're maybe, I feel like I'm learning to kind of move out of like pure just startup growth mode and realizing, like in this 2.0, it's 10 years, but we've been a brand now for 23 years. So, I hesitate to even remotely say that we're like a mature brand, because I don't think we are. We're still so trying to develop ourselves. But I guess that's where we are moving definitely into a new phase. I don't know exactly what it is, but we're moving out of this startup kind of infant company. We have a reputation now. We have been blessed to be on the cover of the Wine Spectator, highest rated wines in California by Robert Parker, but whoever you care to follow. We've had a
Mhm.
lot of those kind of accolades and success. Our brand is now, you can find us in some of the nicest restaurants, really in the world, because we have partners that represent our wines in several countries as well. But we're maturing, I guess. In terms of
You've
growth,
really established you've really established a luxury brand at this point. You're in the first stages of your established luxury brand. Is
yeah,
that fair?
I think that's, yeah. I mean, yes, here I am. Like like, yes, I think that I'm having to accept that. And that's a cool thing, because sometimes, you get so focused on just the grind and the build that you don't ever stop to kind of realize maybe. And so it's important, I think, sometimes to begin to like take some inventory and see where we are as a brand, and maybe begin talking a little bit more now, not like this young, you've never heard of us, but from a, okay, like, we have a following, and we've had some success here. We're still hungry. And so where I'm going there is, we're at about 6,000 cases of wine now. I'd love to see us, we still have the capacity, the ability to grow. I'd love to see us move to 8,000 cases of wine in the next couple of years. There's a lot of untapped opportunity, both through trade, through distribution, but also there's a 2-year waiting list to kind of get on a list to be able to buy our wine. So
Wow.
we understand that there's some opportunity there. I still
I
think that.
think
Go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
Well, I still think though what won't change is the focus is on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. We've had opportunities to take on different varieties, move into different regions, and I just think that there's a few kind of sacred cows, and one of those are like we make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay from the Russian River Valley. That's just who Arista is. If we want to make other great varieties or do other things, we'd start another brand, and there's no conversation of that. But Arista makes Pinot and Chard.
I think what you've just described, and I was talking to another entrepreneur probably 3 weeks ago. It's, and you can correct me if this is not accurate, but you kind of look at yourself and it's hard to accept the fact that you have indeed established a luxury brand because of number one, everything you've been through. And then you're like, it's just me. I didn't, how could I, and not it's just me, but our team. But it's almost hard in this moment to be able to say, yeah, we have established this luxury brand, accept it, move forward with that confidence. And because it's maybe because it's all so new and it happens so fast and you get in the details so much. But I love that what you said, take inventory, appreciate and respect what you have accomplished. And I think that's so important to being able to being to continue being successful is to take that time to recognize what you have accomplished.
Yeah, I think back to my sports analogies. I mean, I think you take some time, some inventory occasionally to celebrate some victories and some things you've done. But I always kind of have this fear, and maybe it's wrong. Maybe I'm contradicting everything I've just said, but I always kind of have this fear too of complacency
Yeah.
or beginning to like, yeah, hey, look what we've done here. Like that just isn't in me either. I'm maybe it's because it's taken 20 years to build this. I think I'm just so much more afraid of complacency that it's hard to sometimes take stock of some of the successes that you've had. Because I just
Yeah,
feel
and I
like
think you have to find that healthy balance, because too many companies do get complacent and then they suffer. But then to your point, you can't not be able to appreciate what you've accomplished. Trying
Mhm,
to find that balance, I think you aptly put a lot of entrepreneurs go through.
mhm, yeah,
I want to talk about a couple things that we've talked on previous podcasts that are really challenging. And you're the primary sales individual for the company, the primary marketer, and the grower relations. How do you determine, and we had a whole podcast on this probably, I don't know, 3, 4 weeks ago. Advertising is really hard.
yeah,
It's really challenging to decide where to spend your money in advertising because you don't always get immediate feedback and it takes time, especially for a luxury brand such as yours, to recognize the benefits of advertising spend.
mhm,
How have you figured out where to spend your advertising dollars and where not?
yeah. We don't. No. Um, our business is kind of funny. Our industry. So the short answer is we look at it a different way, and I'll get to it. The longer part of the answer is wine is kind of a funny industry where the higher the quality, the more elite, the more sought after the brand. There's an inverse relationship to like advertising and social media, et cetera. If you ever think
Yeah,
about it, like you
that's
ever seen
interesting.
any screaming eagle ads? Like it doesn't happen, right?
No.
But you probably do see Gallo ads. So
Yep.
ours is a weird industry that actually the more you try to push and advertise and promote, it almost has the opposite. Like people really draw back from it, or they're like,
Mm.
because I think in wine is one of these things where people there's this idea that people have about wine and some farmer out tending the vine. Like that's the stuff that we sell, and that is the stuff that we do. But you can't be this humble old farmer with $1 million ad budget. That just is there's an incongruency there. So we don't advertise anywhere at all. But the kind of how I look at that is this: so we sell about 85-90% of our product direct to consumer. We love that model for so many reasons. We can go directly to our consumer. They can feel confident that they're getting the product directly from us. We generally that allows us to really control price and knowing that like the best price that they're going to get is coming directly to me on the price. But we also understand and appreciate how important the trade side is it's critical. It is even though it's only about 10 to 15% of our business, it's so critical. And that is really, I look at that as more of a marketing function than a sales function. That's
Sure.
our advertising. We could sell that 10 to 15% direct to consumer, much higher margin. I look at when I see my wine at the French Laundry or Jean Georges or Alinea, um,
Those are very, 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 for those of you who don't know, those are very, very, very high end, well respected restaurants that it's almost impossible to get into unless if you have some very, very deep connections.
Michelin 2-star, Michelin 3-star, the most famous chefs, like there's this associative value that I see when I see my wines on the greatest wine lists in the world. That to me is almost a way that I advertise, right? So you're thumbing through the wine list at the French Laundry and you don't know who I am, but you happen to be going through the Russian or Pinot section and there's 4 on the whole thing, and you presumably know they can have any 4 Russian Pinots that they want, and the 4 they've chosen presumably are probably going to be, in their opinion, at least some of the best there is. So the impact that I get by being on those wine lists is important. So, but you look at that as advertising, because I spend money to get on a plane to fly to Chicago in a hotel to take these Psalms out to have these presentations. So I'm spending money to make those. Not you're not buying placements, but you are working to develop the relationships with these wine buyers, educating them and exposing them, and then they get on. You make a list, and then you get the benefit of that. So that's kind
That's
of
a
how we look at advertising.
that's uh, such an amazing different way to look at advertising, and it makes a lot of sense though for your industry.
Hmm.
And I think that what you just shared with us is a really good example of kind of how you have to think about whether it's advertising or there's so many different things in business, applying it to your specific industry and figuring out what does, in your case, advertising look like in a luxury wine business. It's not your traditional, as you said, $1 million TV, radio, magazine marketing campaign. It's developing those relationships and getting at it in some of the
Yeah.
most well respected restaurants. And that's your advertising budget. And it's
Yeah,
not even
in some
something I
ways, I
was thinking
wish
about.
I wish you could advertise. I mean, in some ways, it would be nice, but it's just in my business. I mean, just everybody out there, start paying attention. How often do you see, hear wine ads? And if you do, are you immediately suspect? It's like
Yeah,
what? So
that's a great point. Just a couple more questions for you, Mark, although
yeah.
I could go on for 4 or 5 hours
Hey man,
here.
I have time. As long as you want to go.
What we've talked about some of the terrifying moments that you went through. Um, what would you say to someone who is thinking about making the jump into starting their own business or is struggling and they're just basically terrified and they're not sure how to move forward and really take that first leap? What words of advice can you give them based on all of your experiences? And we've talked about some of it today, but uh, as succinctly as you can to help them find the motivation and the empowerment to
Yeah.
do whatever they're trying to do.
Well, I would say that's heavier advice than I probably even feel qualified to give. But I would say, number one, you're not alone. You're not the very first person to ever be faced with those feelings. So don't let that prevent you from moving forward. You back to my radical acceptance. Like, what are the ground conditions? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What can you control and what can you not control? But don't, as trite or cliched as that might be, don't be afraid. Like, you don't be afraid. If you are afraid of failing, if you are afraid of not being able to get up tomorrow and go do it again, you probably shouldn't be doing it, because there's risk. There's no certainty. There's no guarantee in any of this stuff. Um, let that fear drive you. Don't let it intimidate you. Um, be real honest with what your strengths are, and hammer hard on that, and then try to surround yourself. Don't be afraid to acknowledge that you've got blind spots, weaknesses. Try to find the best people you possibly can, and then try to stay out of your way. Don't don't acknowledge you got a weakness in an area, hire somebody to do that, and then try to tell them what to do. Like that's the whole point, you know. Like let these people trust your intuition. You're the boss. You're hiring these people. Trust your intuition that you made the right choice, and then let that person do their job. Um,
That's excellent advice. I
yeah,
mean, I think that happens to all of us, is especially if you're a control freak. I
right.
consider myself kind of a
Yeah,
control
yeah.
freak, and it took me a long time to learn they're way better at this than you are. They have more experience. Let them do what they need to do. And especially when you have skin in the game, that can be so hard to let go. But I think you described it perfectly for us with Matt and the winemaking process. Once you did, you guys just blossomed.
Mhm. There's a fine line, and you need to be as the owner. I mean, it's a really fine line. Like you
Yeah.
need to be the control freak. You need to be you because it's you. You ultimately take responsibility for that, but you also have to allow. That's one thing we learned about in our business too. Is like if everything at Arista is about me or Ben making like being here seven, like that's just not a sustainable way to
Yeah.
grow a business. So, but early on, I think you have like there's a balance, but you have to trust your team to make some good choices and decisions if you want to grow. Like you can stay kind of as a one person show, scaling that is really really hard. So,
Yeah, without a great team. What? So I'm in business with my brother. I'm obviously in business with Adam, my best friend.
yep,
That can be challenging. You're in business with your
yeah,
wife, with your brother. Talk to us about being in business with family, because a lot of people think, they've got a hobby with family or friends, and they're like, let's start a business, and it can be interesting when you do that, and it's not always easy. Tell us what you've learned from that experience.
man. Well, I would start off by saying my parents have done a great job of teaching us how to live together, work together, and set some boundaries. I think that you just have to make a dedicated, committed belief that you're not going to allow the business to ruin the family because it can so fast, so easy, as everybody who's ever been in business with family or friends knows. There's some awesome upside to it, but there's some real downside and risk and complications with it. And so Ben and I, we have very different personalities and skill sets, and so I look at that as a blessing. Um, I don't know which end of the light bulb to screw into the socket. Ben can build anything. He is the most crafty guy in the world. Ben would rather build anything than have to stand up in front of a room of people and talk. I could do that all day long. And so I think learning, just like I just said with employees, I think learning the skill sets and the lanes that you're responsible for and having enough respect and trust in each other that you show a tremendous amount of grace and you be willing to yield those lanes to the other members. You can have, and the beauty of the family is that you can have some heated passionate conversations that you could never have with a regular employee,
Yeah.
but you have to always remind each other that this like family comes first. I would rather yield and let you make that decision than let that drive a wedge between us. And so, maybe there are businesses that maybe there are some decisions that have been detrimental that we could have made a better business decision, but we just felt like it was going to rock the family's boat a little bit, and we just have honestly, for better or for worse, kind of we try to make these decisions that are going to keep the family strong and united, as opposed to um, drive a wedge. It's just more important. It truly, sincerely is more important for us to be able to sit together at dinner than it is to, have some victory at business, but kind of hurt our relationship. So,
Mark, truer words couldn't have been spoken. I gotta jot this down, and I hope anybody and everybody can hear what you just described, because I'm not sure that I've ever had someone put it as aptly, succinctly, and so um, plain-mindedly focused as how you just described when you're thinking about going into business with either family or friends, and recognizing what's important in that type of scenario, regardless of what happens.
Because things can go wrong. I mean, things go wrong, as you know, real fast. And for innocent, honest, good, like, just you can get sideways real quick. And you just have to be prepared for that. I think thinking that stuff ahead of time and how you're going to negotiate and work through some conflict is really like, while things are cool and calm and we've kind of talked through a process, so that if things are getting heated and we need to step back, or we need to kind of like, not mediation, but there needs to be some sort of like talk through, there's a plan for that versus just emotions drive it. And it can get ugly.
Yeah, no, I think that's setting expectations or boundaries for what in advance of a
Yep.
situation or getting to that point.
Yep.
Mark, is there anything we haven't talked about today? And we've covered so many incredible topics, and you've given me and all of our listeners some amazing advice
Mhm.
in so many different scenarios in business. But is there anything that we haven't talked about that specifically comes to mind for you that you can advice that you would give to whether aspiring entrepreneurs or people just starting, or quite frankly, someone that's in a business for 30 years and they're either burnt out or their business is dying and they're not sure what to do and they just need some encouragement or help? Is there anything you want to cover that we haven't already done so?
I've loved our time. And I think we have covered a lot of the big stuff. I'm sure that we could continue talking, and find some other topics. But in terms of like the big issues, I think you've done a great job of kind of walking through and keeping this thing moving forward, despite my want to go down all these rabbit trails. No,
Well,
I'm big into, I think, being honest with yourself, um, having passion, not being afraid to fail, um, believing in yourself, believing in your dream. Um, you got to be rational about it, be realistic about it. But if it's assuming it's a realistic dream, believe in yourself, because nobody else is going to, right? I mean, you have, if you don't believe it, it's probably destined to fail. Um, and then just be gracious. Be like, I think we work really hard to be really great at what we do. But I think what we talk about internally and hopefully culturally inside of our company, let's not get too proud of ourselves. Let's not take ourselves too seriously. I think a lot of um, self-deprecation and just an ability to kind of remain humble and normal, I think, has been part of our success. Because in my business, it's easy to get snooty, and pretty proud of this grape juice that you're making. And so, keep it all in check. I think sometimes too, as you begin to have success, just you know, be driven by your
yeah,
passion and your hunger to get better. Don't worry about. I could, last thing I will say is, like, Matt taught me that too. When he came on board, he came from a winery that had tremendous success in the media, and we'd never had that. And of course, ego, that's part of what you want, but kind of learning. And I feel like I've even heard coaches talk about it too. But hearing my winemaker say it, and I'm like, I connected those dots, that you become more obsessed and passionate about kind of the process and the what you're building, and focus so much more on that, and constantly refining that and honing that, and the success will come and the accolades will come and the attention will come. But if you're focused on that, if you're focused on just trying to get the score, it's a fruitless, hopeless journey, because you're trying to guess what some subjective media person's going to say, and they'll take, like, don't be focused on that. If you can find, man, if you can be passionate about something and then you get really nerdy about the process of how you do something, and that becomes joy, and just you love coming to work every day just to work on the behind the scenes stuff that customers never see, that you're setting yourself up long term for some success at that point.
that is such a great way to think about it that I hadn't thought about it before, Mark. Focusing on the process and really getting to the outcome, not the outcome itself, because the outcome will
That's the
come.
byproduct. The byproduct
Yeah.
is the success and the accolades, right? Like,
Yeah.
just the system. Get the system down. Like measure twice, cut once. Every part of how we grow a grape and make a wine, we have obsessed over that process. And to this day, we've done it now for 10 or 12 years. Every single year we talk about systems. Where can we improve? What did we do wrong? How, like, that becomes the obsession, not are we going to get another big score this year? We trust that we're doing a great job and that we can grow great grapes and make great wine, and we know we're good. Don't focus on that endpoint. Focus on the process.
And then I love what you said about humility and have a little fun, because if you can't have fun in the process, what's the point?
Yep, totally.
Mark, where can people, I know you said there's a tier wait list, but you've got some incredible wine. Where can people find more out about Arista and see your guys' story?
Come check. I mean, come to the website, Arista Winery. I got it on my shirt, aristawinery.com. I joked about marketing. You can go to our Instagram page. We have some really pretty pictures, but it's not often updated. But there is ways to get in touch with us, and of course, come visit us. If you're people listening, watching, have never been to Sonoma County, never been to the town of Healdsburg, put it on your list. It is honestly one of the most beautiful places on the planet. It's a small little town. It's quaint. There's exceptional food. Um, whether you like wine or not, there are things to do. I'm a runner and a cyclist. There's world-class cycling. There's just like, it's a beautiful spot. So come see us. You can make an appointment on our website or call us to come visit us. And we'd love to spend some time, pull some corks, and talk about our process.
Yeah, and I can second that because I've been there. And if you have not been there, you want to see the beauty of God's creation.
Yeah,
Uh,
Sonoma County.
that area in California is incredible.
Yep.
Mark,
Adam, thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much for your time and all of your wisdom and advice and sharing your story and your successes and your failures. We can't thank you enough.
Andrew, you are the man. I appreciate you having me on. It's a treat to do this, and I look forward to the next time we're together and pull some corks and drink some wine, tell some stories, man. Thanks a lot.
Likewise. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, buddy.
Have a great day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's all the time that we have for this week's episode. What an incredible conversation with Mark. Just such an authentic and really amazing story. And I'm so thankful for all of the struggles, the successes, and the failures that he shared with us. And he just had some incredible advice. If you have any questions for Mark that you want me to ask him, or you have any thoughts about the podcast, or any stories that you thought of when Mark was sharing his journey of being an entrepreneur, reach out to me on our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. Of course, you can also tweet at me. My Twitter handle is @HollandPodcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get weekly updates of the video version when we post them every Wednesday. Remember, this is a business and financial podcast. Sometimes we talk about legal things, sometimes we talk about accounting principles. Just remember, if you have a specific situation, you want to consult the appropriate professionals in your area, and don't take anything you hear on this podcast or any other podcast as the absolute ultimate truth for your specific situation. Thank you so much again for joining us this week. As we've always said, this podcast is only as good as we collectively make it. So if you have questions, if there's conversations or guests you want me to invite, or questions I'm not asking the guests, please reach out to me and let me know. Because the more we're all involved, the more we're all going to enjoy and learn from this podcast. You guys all have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, @Holland Podcast. That's @Holland Podcast, for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.